All right, welcome to the Digital Innovation Zone. My name is Alex Cornell du Houx. I'll be moderating a panel on the future of green capital. I'm the co-founder of Elected Officials to Protect America, and on the international side, Elected Officials to Protect the Earth, where we have a partnership with the University of San Francisco and the Parliamentary Educational Foundation. What we're going to focus on this panel here is really looking at how innovative financing mechanisms can fill the gaps where capital is not going. I'd love to have our panel introduce themselves by just going down the line briefly, and then Kevin will jump to you after Heather.
Hello, I'm Derek Gallo, managing partner of Norm Investments based here in Brazil, and honored to be here today. Hi, I'm Andy Katz. I'm a director at the East Bay Municipal Utility District in Oakland, California.
Hi everyone, I'm Oleg Sernet. I'm a mayor of Ukrainian city Pustonosy in Lviv region in Ukraine, and nice to see you all today.
Hi, Heather Buchanan. I'm co-founder and chief executive of Bankers Bureau.
And hello all, I'm Kevin Barrow, the CEO of Stewards AI out of New York.
And Kevin knows how to put the mic right next to him, so when we're speaking, because it's an online event primarily, they need us to sound uncomfortably loud, okay? All right, so we're going to start this panel off by looking at one of the programs and reports that our good partner One Earth with Justin Winters and has put together with Venture Labs that shows where the capital's going and where it's not. So first, just taking a quick step back, in order to solve the climate crisis, if you could go to the next slide, please, it's really to be broken down into three pillars: energy transition, nature conservation, and regenerative agriculture. And what One Earth has done with their partnerships in the Vibrant Data Labs, is really to look at the peer-reviewed data. And the peer-reviewed science has really shown a clear pathway forward to solving the climate crisis. If we go to the next slide, there are 75 solutions over these three pillars are focusing in on how we can get there in a path. Each one of these can provide their own investment. And the challenge here is, how do you do this in the most efficient, effective manner? And until now, we didn't have a really full idea of what that pathway could be. Because if we go to the next slide after that, what they've done is created a One Earth Solutions finance tracker called Minding the Gaps. And this is a really innovative tool where they've looked at over $400 billion of investment and then over 10,000 investments in the United States between philanthropic and private investments. And for the first time ever, we can see this data mapped. And the next slide will show some of it. And what we'll see is that there's a huge gap here, right? At 89%, that's going to energy, 4% to nature, and 7% to agriculture. This is not nearly enough to protect, restore, and reconnect approximately 50% of the Earth's lands and oceans that we need to in order to solve the climate crisis. And that's one very clear data point. It's not even close, right? That's not to say the energy investment isn't unbelievable, but we need to be able to focus capital in these areas that don't have it. And then within the nature conservation, less than 6% of philanthropic capital reaches indigenous lands. And when we look at regenerative agriculture, it's only 7%. And as we know here, globally, agriculture is the biggest emitter. So again, we're seeing where the gaps are between actually where the capital's going and where the finances are actually going. So next slide, please. And if we dig into the energy side, we're seeing about 50% is going to solar PV. Still amazingly important, right? Because solar has been a lifesend in Ukraine, right? Solar batteries have increased by 1.5 gigawatts since the full-scale invasion, but unfortunately, that's not going to solve it alone, because it's estimated that it'll be about 21% of the energy mix that's needed to actually solve the solution. So how can we focus capital on other innovative solutions? The NREL in Colorado has looked at using, well, it's technically not lasers, but microwave that match the frequency of the rocks that dig into the Earth up to 12 miles for superheated geothermal. Or just regular closed loop geothermal can be an amazing solution too, right? And then when we look at offshore wind, it's receiving far fewer investments than they could, but the United States, that could power the US 2 times over, right? So these are the energy mixes that need to happen in order for us to actually meet the climate solutions in the time and urgency that we need to. And if we dig into the nature-based financing, this is unfortunately the most underfunded solution pillar. And we can see, as I mentioned earlier, only 6% are going to indigenous. And even though agriculture is the biggest emitter in the world, it's not receiving the financing it needs. Less than 2.5 of funding supports core regenerative agriculture project practices. And so, moving to the next slide here. Well, within there, plant-based bio meats and others have gotten a lot of attention and financing, but they've never been able to scale yet. And yes, a salmon grown in a lab probably sounds quite appetizing to some, but it's getting far more financing than a nature-based solution with regenerative agriculture. And so this is not to say that any one solution is better or worse than another. It's just saying where we put the finances in the right order to make the biggest impact to solve the climate crisis in the most expeditious manner, because we don't have time. Unlike Ukraine has been unbelievably innovative because they have to fight a war where distributed energy and agriculture and their innovative local solutions to grow products locally is feeding the local towns is done by necessity, and they've created wonderful accelerations of building 19 wind turbines on the battlefront that are still standing, by the way, only 100 kilometers away from the front lines. Well, other countries have built no wind turbines at all during that time frame. But the world can't wait because the climate for a war. The world cannot wait to be at war before we take these solutions seriously. And so what we're going to look at here is what are these innovative solutions and how can we move the capital in the right place through the wonderful work that Derek and others are doing. So I'd love to pass it to Derek to talk a little bit about some of the blended finance and other innovative solutions that he's been working on that can push capital and encourage it to be in the right places so we can have the best solutions to protect our planet and people.
Great, thank you so much, Alex. It was interesting, you said the 3 different sectors was energy, agriculture, and nature. And as we see that the energy sector 25 years ago is more or less where the nature-based solution sector is. I actually based here in Brazil, which is the biggest nature-based solutions market in the world. it's like any market. We see it developing. It obviously takes time. But what I see is I left my investment banking job probably 20-something years ago to work with impact investing. Back then, it was about blended finance. That was the big thing. It was fixing, philanthropic capital with other types of capital. So many years later, now that I work helping carbon developers and also some climate tech startups raising money and structuring deals. And one of the concepts that I've been really intrigued by is what I call exponentially regenerative finance. So essentially, I'm looking at finance in three different dimensions. So one of them is the blended finance. It's all these different vehicles. It's first loss vehicles. It's fixing different types of capital. A second element is all the carbon, biodiversity credits, essentially ecosystem services, or any kind of monetization of positive impact. Right, we're seeing everything from credits for recycling, for plastics, for nature-based solutions, etc. And then the third one, which I think is the innovative piece to this, which we're adding to the mix, is actually let's say eco-efficiency. So let me give you an example. So we're actually an investor in a company here in Brazil called Green Fuel that has developed a hydrogen generation system. It's an electrolysis system. It generates hydrogen on demand, and we inject it into the motors of diesel, of trucks, of buses, etc. So it's taken us many years. We can reduce a minimum 4 to 5%, sometimes even like 10 to 12% savings. We're getting paybacks of around maybe 16 months or so. There's a lot of it's a simple solution. It reduces emissions and it generates a lot of savings. It's economically viable, even without the carbon. So we're now starting to go to market. We've just been working on recently. We just did our first with Maersk, about 35 systems are hoping to set up on their trucks. And now what I'm thinking about is a new concept, and this actually brings in agriculture and nature as well. What if we could take the savings for the fleet of trucks over the next 10 years? And what if we could make a loan that would be repaid with that savings? In other words, we're taking the present value of that savings. We're essentially bringing money. That doesn't mean we're anticipating future savings. So this money that we get will be repaid with the future savings. And then we take that money, let's say we're in Brazil, let's say we plant on degraded land, we plant forests that generate biofuels with the macaúba palm, the macaw palm, or other things. Then actually the companies can own their own forests. They can produce biofuels that actually will sequester carbon. They can enhance biodiversity. This can all be done essentially for free, and we can finance this with low-cost capital. And then we also have carbon as well, so we can monetize that carbon, which also adds impact. So that's one example. And then some other examples, and just get a couple other examples, and I'll pass the mic. And then, for example, what if we have Red Plus projects where we take the money from the Red Plus and we use that money then to do restoration as well. So that finances the restoration. So we have the carbon money and then we get more carbon credits from the restoration. Then we have another company we work with called Bioverse, has drones that fly over the forest. And they can map all the species, and then we can actually work with the non-timber forest products and get new revenue streams. So these are the kinds of things. It's about connecting different revenue streams, carbon, with financing, with eco-efficiency, all kinds. One was energy efficiency I gave, but that could be anywhere across the supply chain. So yeah, I just want to give those examples as concrete ways where we can work on this kind of structures.
So those are some wonderful concrete examples on the ground that we could use to create financing. I'd like to take a step upward to look at the Article 6 negotiations that Andy Katz has been in the heart of and the heat of at this top 30. As well as some of the municipal bond work you've been doing with your city.
Thank you, Alex. I'll be talking about two things that are really quite different, but still relate to the overall topic of this presentation. That's really because of there's so many things to do in the international climate space. The one thing that I focus on primarily, at least at this point in time, is the implementation of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which addresses the transfer of carbon mitigation from one country to another towards the NDC, and the use of that carbon mitigation to actually operationalize the goals of the Paris Agreement, create mitigation, create the emission reduction, and then following rules and standards that the parties have agreed on and that the United Nations subsidiary bodies have agreed on to implement those standards, and then what we should be seeing projects on the ground. I'll talk about that a little bit. I'll also talk about my experience as a municipal official in the San Francisco Bay Area region, where we operate a large utility that serves 1.5 million people. And we've had a very interesting experience with green bonds. And I think some of the experience, we've also had experience with the waste sector and getting to zero waste and food recycling. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And I'll start with that municipal experience first. I think we have to take a look at, when we're talking about green capital, green finance, what is motivating that finance? We have traditional capital expects a rate of return, and it's carefully measured and it's compared against, and investors are expecting typically a profit. We have an important sector of impact investors that are willing to accept a lower rate of return voluntarily to be able to get the social values of green finance out there and to actually deploy the climate solutions we need. And we should be very thankful for those investors, those impact investors that want to see green impact investing in all of the sectors that we need it. There's also ways that governments can help by creating tax incentives that subsidize those investment tools and can provide tax credits to the investors. And the banking industry is very familiar with how to syndicate those tax credits and actualize them into lower effective interest rates that the bondholders will expect payment back for their return. And depending on the scale of those credits, in the real world in the United States, for the types of sectors that have this going, we can see reductions in the effective interest rate in the 2 to 3% range. And if we have bigger subsidies, we might even be able to see bigger ones. Of course, the United States has a long way to go in picking up where things have left off, but I provide that as an example. So when East Bay Mud made its first issuance for a request for proposals for green bonds, we thought that we would see a really interesting thing, that we would actually see a lower interest rate simply by marketing the bond as green. We felt very strong in our validation that our public waterworks that protects the natural resource area of San Francisco Bay would qualify as adequately environmentally protected to be a green bond. There aren't really clear standards for green bonds, and I think that might be something to be thoughtful about. But what we found was that there wasn't actually a meaningful financial difference in the bond proposals that we received compared to the regular market. There actually was not, unfortunately, a market response to our municipal issuance of green bonds. So that really should tell us that we need to be talking to governments more about financial systems that will create tax credits or will fill in the gap. And we also need to be thinking about the private sector and how does the private sector market itself to impact investors? How do we actually get more impact investors interested and willing to participate that will underbid the traditional market participants so that we can make green bonds more financially affordable? That takes me to another tool that in general, our agency does have a strong payback opportunity, strong payback reliability. We're going to pay our bills back. We have consistently for many years had a AAA plus bond rating from Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and that means that we're able to borrow at extremely low rates that are in the 2 to 3% range, and that means that I think we have a lot of opportunity with municipal partnership in entities that have strong bond ratings, or if entities that don't have strong bond ratings could find partners to help underwrite their bonds. That we would be able to actually have cost savings, cost along the customers for some of those electricity sector projects. We could deliver energy efficiency projects at the retail level. We could deliver more or lower costs that retail customers would actually be able to take advantage of if we could replace the bonds that are normally marketed to customers in the 8 to 10% range for home improvements for energy efficiency. If we borrowed municipal bond ratings and found that the appropriate way to do it, we could offer those bonds for 2 or 3% less if we're able to match the investment with the bond issuance from the municipal government with the community's projects that they're dispersed and distributed at the retail level. I think we need to be thinking about those types of tools even more. Insurance is critical. When we went out to look for a partner who would be able to do food recycling, we wanted to do composting at the municipal level, but our infrastructure, even though we were the first municipal utility in North America to build an anaerobic digester, capture methane, and convert the methane into renewable biogas. Excuse me, convert the anaerobic digestion process waste gas into renewable energy through a power generation station that combusts the methane instead of allowing it to proceed to the atmosphere where it's a high global warming potential compound. We found that there was too much risk to put up the specialized facilities that require processing municipal food waste. We would risk chicken bones and plastic getting into our dewatering facility, and that was unacceptable in terms of the risk to our capital assets. We really needed a higher level government or an insurance product that would be able to look at our future revenues from the revenue stream that comes from the food processing and recycling revenue stream, and to be able to look at that and quote an insurance product that would be able to help hedge the risk of damage to our capital assets and give us the confidence to move forward. So I think those types of financial tools are ones that we need to be exploring more. I'll address Article 6 now next.
Actually, let's go to that right after, because I think that'll flow really well from what Heather's going to talk about. Because you've taken us on a wonderful journey from the solutions on the ground to the innovative financing mechanism with the bonds to insurance. And actually, Heather was just on a panel focusing on insurance. So this is a perfect segue to talk about what are the perceived risks versus the real risks. Because you've literally been going around the world into different embassies talking about how finance and risk are working together, and frankly, not working together in many places effectively. So could you talk a little bit about the perceived risk versus the reality on the ground and how that's affecting the gaps where finances should be going versus are just flowing because we're herd animals and jumping in?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important point, and actually bearing in mind with the a digital innovation pavilion, and we've got such an extraordinary amount of data is available. We're flooded with data on a daily basis, but then for some reason we don't necessarily kind of slice and dice it the right way, or we've got significant gaps. So Ukraine is a very good example that I always like to use, because I travel to Ukraine quite regularly, and one of the things I always say when I come back is, I'll speak to people in the city in London and investors, and everybody says, "Oh, when the war ends, when the war ends, when the war ends," and they're always surprised to hear how much work's actually going on now, and that things are really getting rebuilt, and plans are being made, and innovation is happening, and innovation is happening at scale and at speed that most of us would be very envious of. And this goes very much down to the perceived risk versus real risk. I'm very surprised to learn that actually we can have security companies that have mapped out risk per square kilometer. There are certainly areas that where a good percentage of the country is not at risk. And we know where every drone's flown, and we know things in terms of insurability. There'll be areas in California that are less insurable than Ukraine for natural disasters and whatnot. So getting much more kind of granular about that data. And also, I'm thinking back to a conversation I had with somebody from the UN, and he was talking about how they were trying to finance issue green bonds in the African country. They said they ended up having to create a 95% guarantee for the bond because everybody was so worried about the risk. But then at the end of it, when it looked at it, the default rate was less than 5%. So, the default rate in actuality was less than default rates in the States and things like that. But the perception was that this was going to be a really risky investment. It just shows then that 95% guarantee, that was the real putting on actually risky subject. So getting to that, I guess, getting beyond that voice making, I think almost that initial process of looking at things, almost challenging our assumptions and perceptions at the beginning, has got to be one of the kind of ways that we break through the logic.
Thank you. And these are really important points. When the risk was only 5%, it's similar with the loan program office at the Department of Energy. Their default rate is 3%, when the perception out there is it's extremely risky. So busting those perceptions is really important to be able to operational, specifically where you made a good point is that's waste of capital where it could be invested in the truly risky areas to help the biggest impact in the areas that really need it. And so let's take a step into how we're looking at the data, actually, because the data you're showing, if they follow the data to drive the best financial returns and protect the community, is really what Kevin Barrow is doing. You can bring him in online. And it's a really innovative AI that's looking at all the different policy solutions you could put in. So say as an elected official, I'm interested in this policy, and the AI can analyze the city, and then as a result, look at the financial outputs that can come from that policy. So Kevin, if you could talk a little bit of how you've worked in a couple of the cities in the United States and how that potentially could support other places, say in Ukraine, and educating policy members on the advantages of bringing finance to solve the climate solution.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And before jumping in, I would just like to say that, my comments are deeply connected to the observations that Andy and both Heather made in terms of the impact of municipal debt when deployed strategically to be catalytic for longitudinal change. But Heather's point about the importance of being able to ascertain municipal risk. So let me start off with the second point about insurability and why I believe that this perception of risk is really going to be a driving force, regardless of not only one's stance on climate change in the US, but really helping to push this forward. When we think about municipal debt generally, we think about, at least in most affluent countries, we look at it as a type of debt which is very safe because it is backed by the municipality's power to generate revenue, often through taxation or through whatever projects might be funded. However, one of the risks which is coming with climate volatility, and I use that term volatility very intentionally because it's not just simply a changing climate, but the fact that the past is no longer indicative of the future and no longer indicative in ways we cannot even begin to predict. So all of our actuarial tables are falling apart, and this risk is being approached by insurance companies as an increase in the cost of premiums in some instances, or a complete you're just completely retreating from certain environments altogether. And so the extent to which cities are not proactively engaging in climate resilience and climate adaptation and doing so comprehensively, thinking about how this is affecting their citizenry, the businesses that are operating, the communities that are living therein, they are making themselves increasingly uninsurable. And when a municipality is uninsurable, it is literally a half step away from being uninvestable. And the moment that a city is uninvestable, it literally begins to enter, in the words of one Californian politician, into a death spiral. And this is not hyperbolic, and this is reality. And I would point to no other place other than say Puerto Rico in the U.S., and we saw its default recently after its hurricanes, and and just the implications for that across the spectrum of agencies and services that are being provided to city, the ability for them to access capital in the markets, the ability for them to invest in a future which allows the citizens of Puerto Rico to thrive in place, was compromised by this default. And so everything is interlinked. And to access to address the return to Andy's point now in terms of being able to identify institutional investors and investors generally that are able to see their to be able to see their interests deeply aligned is incredibly important. It might be difficult to, it might be surprising to quote the head of climate at KKR, but I believe Pierre recently observed that he doesn't believe in ESG, but that just in terms of some public remarks that he made, but that ESG is deeply interwoven, or rather the principles underlying it in terms of environmental, social, the importance of governance are issues which are deeply interwoven into the very DNA of the way they approach all of their investments. And this is something which the capital markets are very quickly waking up to. The challenge that it's had is that for ordinary companies to be able to understand the role of various municipal bond instruments in their and how they are material to their activities, that is not obvious, right? And so what our platform specializes in, I think that's something which is increasingly important regardless of how it's being done, is being able to draw the through line between municipal projects around climate adaptation and resilience, or municipal projects in general, and the longitudinal value that they are producing in terms of being able to de-risk investment or insurance within the municipality, but essentially how they are the most fundamental principle, of a fundamental level, allowing that community to thrive, and for that thriving to be resilient, and for that thriving to be ultimately human centered. And that just like in wrapping up, just so I know that there are others that need to speak, but I think that the lenses that we began this conversation with, whether we're looking at the energy transition, nature conservation, or indeed regenerative agriculture, it's very important that we no longer apologies, I'm still at the airport, so I apologize for the speaking, but that we look at these through the lens of human-centered design, and that's something which I just wanted to make sure that we raise and integrate into our conversation moving forward.
Thank you, Kevin. And we'll definitely get into more information regarding how the AI is allowing policymakers to make decisions that are improving their communities while bringing finances into the municipality, city, or region.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's really important, so a few things. Many times municipal data is sitting in silos, sometimes on desks, right? And the question is not only how do we bring this data together in terms of what we're building is a comprehensive digital twin of municipalities, which integrate data from across municipal agencies, and actually in that process of integration over time helps to standardize it so it becomes legible to the capital markets, but integrating that data into private public, in terms of public from the state or federal level, as well as philanthropic data, so data that's coming from foundations and nonprofits, with the goal of being able to understand in high fidelity and in real time what is actually happening within the communities in which our stakeholders live. Now, taking that data, which is a representative of where we are, using data that's coming from looking at peer cities, looking at our CTs, looking at the work coming out of think tanks and the academy, to be able to use that to longitudinally model in a hyper-contextual way what is likely to happen within that community, not just within the election cycles of 2, 4, 6 years, but really projecting that into the long term, so as to understand, where are we going in terms of our public health? Where are we going in terms of the ability of our land to actually produce healthy, nutritious, mineral-rich food? Where are we going in food systems, public health, mobility, and indeed our ability to resist the climate shocks, which are becoming increasingly current. And so being able to bring this to bear and understand what types of interventions, or more importantly, the portfolios of interventions, need to be introduced in what iterative manner in order to move from where we are and the trajectory lines that we are on to being able to achieve healthier, more sustainable, more resilient communities, and doing so within the budget constraints that we have. Being able to understand the scenarios that are before us, their pros and their cons, and being able to make an intelligent decision, which is transparent, which allows us to be accountable to all of our stakeholders, whether it's the communities that we serve or the investors that are funding our initiatives. And that's important because the number that Alex began with was, I think you showed the map of about $400 billion across the United States. We all know the costs of funding this climate adaptation journey that we're on, and it's not billions, hundreds of billions, or even single-digit trillions. It's many, many tens of trillions of dollars that are going to be needed over the next few decades. And if we're planning to partner with the private sector and institutional investors to unlock that capital at scale, they will demand this type of transparency and accountability before they open their wallets or very large bank accounts.
Thank you, Pippin. We're definitely looking forward to seeing the results from the cities that you're piloting shortly. So I'd love to bring it on the ground, though. So in Ukraine, for instance, you're a municipality and city, Lviv. We talk a lot about how we're bringing this capital to the markets, where it's going, different financing mechanisms, if it's blended or private and public partnerships. But we can't forget that only 3% of the investment is going to underserved communities with for-profit companies in the United States. And similarly, unfortunately, that's a trend globally. And so what is the impact of being able, in your local municipality and city, how does that affect the people you're with? So if we're able to provide that capital to provide the innovative solutions that both strengthen the community while protecting the planet and our security, how can that help in Tel Aviv?
Thank you, Alex, for a very interesting direction. It's very important to think locally and to do locally, because climate and climate adaptation isn't not only in some country important, it's very important for all our planet, and we don't have any borders in this very important question. And capital can be in one place, it must be in different places. For example, I am as a mayor of a small city with citizens near 16,000 people. Think that we can do something good for our planet only when we do it in different places in one time, because only so we can do something good for our common planet. And for example, in our country now, when we have a war, we don't have house in this question, and you are right in the part that we can't having this challenge wait to the east, and we must think now what we can do climate better now, and we want to do from our local budgets big directions, because all our money goes to defend our country and to help our defenders. But we search for different funds in different places in Europe, in the United States of America, in the global society, and it's very important to have good experience, good practices from different countries. And it's very important to have some partners, some sister partnerships in different countries for our Ukrainian towns, and we search for good practices that can be realized now in, for example, in our city, and these good practices could be examples for rebuilding of Ukraine in the future, because on the West we can do something in climate adaptation, in something good for nature, and this will be good practice for the East. Our Ukrainian cities that are damaged, and they can be rebuilt now in this day, in this week. And when we do something good now, and this will be good for the future. And for example, we discuss with our citizens, with our inhabitants, and they want to live in clear climate, in good future for their children, and only together we can do something good for our.
Thank you. If there's any place where the energy investment is needed, definitely Ukraine, because their energy security is everyone's energy security.
Yes, because we are decentralized in our country, only this way we can be safety from our enemy, and energy can be when decentralized. So solar panels, good idea that you have told at the start of our panel discussion are very important for our country, and our country can be such a good innovation place for the future for the world, because it's a clear place for new building. Because for example, in the United States of America, you must repair something, you must maybe reconstruct something. In our country, we can build it from zero and have a good result for all global society.
That's a really good point. Most people are not aware that Ukraine could power Europe 6 times over, and if it's within 10 kilometers of existing grid, about 3 times over. And so there's a tremendous amount of energy there that can help Europe as well. And so this is what the theme here. What's the future of green capital to fix those gaps and minding the gaps that the One Earth report had put out. And one of the mechanisms we have to do that is through Article 6 that is being negotiated right here, right now. So Andy, if you could talk a little bit about, we have 10 minutes left, so I'd like to get everyone's perspective. Using, like, say, Article 6 or other financing mechanisms, how are we using that capital flow to ensure that we mind the gaps and fill it so that we can create the best climate solutions possible?
Sure. So Article 6 is operating in the same ecosystem as other green capital, because Article 6 is a very new suite of programs. There's a framework under Article 6. It includes Article 6.2, which is bilateral cooperation between different countries. We're seeing some of those cooperative approaches being reported out, and the initial reports are getting reviewed right now. So projects that are actually on the ground, we're not seeing a lot of those just yet, because this really just got started. The rules didn't actually get complete until a year at the last COP. So the rules under Article 6.4 have been just adopted by the supervisory body that was with all of the rules, modalities, and procedures adopted at the top last year. And the subsidiary body has completed the standards for removals, standards for permanence and standards for countries producing their methodologies just recently in the last few months. So we're really just seeing now the opportunities for project participants, project proponents, host countries to start actually bringing their projects to the table and plan out what is the purpose of the project, what is the revenue stream of the project, and most critical to that is quantifying the amount of carbon reductions, emission reductions that will be accomplished from the project. And get into the problems of risk and risk mitigation, getting to an accurate perception of risk, and then coming up with the financial tools to deal with that risk. I think that's a very important area to develop more market understanding and knowledge to develop that confidence. If you look at the past, and if you look at carbon markets in the past, we had a very wide range of problems that happened. Where depending on the sector and depending on which protocol you're looking at, you might see a very wide gap in the types of results that you get in terms of where a project that may have been framed as an offset and what it actually accomplishes in terms of emission reduction. So a meta-analysis that was released at COP last year identified some projects as high as 65% of achievement of the emission reductions claimed, and as low as 14%, which is obviously not very good. These are other systems, that may have happened under the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism, or the Kyoto Protocol. They may have happened under voluntary carbon market programs. They may have happened under certain national or subnational emissions trading schemes or programs. So they're not necessarily and likely would not be the same as what's happening under Article 6. Article 6 is learning from a lot of those lessons. There's a permanent standard that is very helpful for addressing those lessons learned, where a proponent of a project does have to cover the risk of reversals for up to 100 years. So that's a very strong signal for certainty, because what would be very troubling for a market participant or for an investor is to try to anticipate, well, what would happen if the project would fail or did not deliver the results that it's claiming. Where would that accountability come from? Would that come from the buyer country needing to procure more of the same type of product? Would it come from the project participant and proponent being on the hook for paying that themselves, investors, other participants? So that responsibility has to go somewhere, because the party that's claiming that contribution towards its NDC, the party that's depending on that offset to make sure that its communication to all of the parties at the Paris Agreement is actually resulting in climate benefits. That is a risk that needs to be minimized, so that when we're 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that the investors of the project aren't left with an unacceptable uncertainty about how do they make up the difference in the unfortunate but very real possibility of a reversal, especially when we're talking about natural working landscapes. So dealing with strategies to do the right project selection, getting the stability of our current standards, and developing that knowledge so that we get market familiarity with the standards to thereby minimize the risk, get more certainty, and then we're able to get lower prices because of we wouldn't be able to see market participants would be able to predict what the costs actually are, and wouldn't be hedging their bets in the original quote to build the project.
Wonderful. And one of the interesting things about Article 6 is it's inherently nature-based solution oriented in many ways.
It is being used in that way. There are unique issues in that sector, but it can be used in the energy, electric sector. It can be used in many different sectors.
Traditionally, as we've seen in the voluntary market, that's been very much focused on the nature-based solutions, carbon sequestration, and building forests. So I'm curious, with the work you're doing, how does it potentially increase the effectiveness of the nature-based solutions so we can continue to fill the gap that the Water report had outlined?
Yeah,
Let me give an example. So we are working on an innovative financial structure securitization in Brazil with a US-based developer, Simple Pasture project called Working Tree. On out of it was developed at Stanford University. They came to Brazil because the trees were much faster and the projects were much greater. So we're working with a securitization product called a CRA. So it's an agricultural receivable product. Essentially, it's a kind of debt instrument, and it follows all of the Brazilian legislation. The action is tax deductible for retail investors in a way of stimulating investments in the agricultural sector. And then it's backed by another instrument, which is essentially a debt instrument for the ranchers, which is typically for like soy, grains, where they actually have to they have to get a look, they get a finance, they have to deliver the product. In this case, some legislation developer clean CPR, which in this case is carbon. So essentially, we're using this carbon delivery instrument, and that backs the other financial instrument. And then we can issue those in Brazil, we can actually register in Vienna, and then we can offer those also to national investors as well. So it's an innovative financial securitization model where the carbon is the guarantee for the operation. So that's a great example. Obviously, Article 6 and all these issues need to be they can't create barriers. But I think this is perfect opportunity. So carbon essentially in this case, the developer 100% carbon revenues is hooked up with the ranchers, and then the wood, the subculture is also with the ranchers.
Wonderful. So in 3 minutes. And the reality is, though, it's still hopeful because in the United States, the study came out by the Center for Global Security and the University of Maryland that if the states jump in and then by 2028 the federal government jumps back in, we can still reduce the U.S. emissions by 56% by 2035. So, given the work here, a lot of times it can get daunting and depressing, frankly, and hot and sweaty. Despite that, though, we're seeing capital be invested at a more prolific rate than we have seen in the history of the planet, into clean energy, into regenerative agriculture, and into all the innovative financing solutions. So, in one or two words, where do you see the future of green capital going? Is it helpful? What words of inspiration, the last two, do you have? We'll just go down the line and finish with you, Kevin.
Yeah, I would say we're just the slope of the curve is just starting to steepen. So we're at the very beginning. I'd say, as I said before, we're probably like 20 years behind where renewable energy projects are. So upwards and accelerate.
There's so many functional benefits to a balanced electric portfolio that integrates solar, which peaks at late in the day, wind, which is peaks throughout the day, and bioenergy. And we see so many benefits of that balanced portfolio that I'm very optimistic that getting towards 100% renewable energy is just going to make sense as we transition away from fossil fuels.
As Ukrainian, I think that it's hopeful and all can be done, and we must search instruments for all, not reasons why we can't do something. So I think that when you feel some critical situation, you can search a good solution. So I think that all can be done.
Definitely optimistic. It's inevitable. At the end of the day. And when you actually look at the way the financial institutions and finances are actually measuring risk, all of these risks and climate risks, they're just becoming part of the equation. And so it's just plain common sense. And that's right. Despite all the politics we've got going on in the world, when you actually talk to people that are assessing risk in financial institutions and whatnot, that's what we're talking about.
I see in the insurance sector and potentially and unexpectedly the life insurance sector of all sectors is taking a lead in addressing to address transition and being a leader in green capital. I also see large corporations really integrating this very deeply into their DNA. I'm heartened by unexpected firms like McDonald's, and under the leadership of folks like Beth Hart, looking at regen agriculture and looking at how they can take their multi-billion-dollar supply chain and make it and take large steps towards making that regenerative. And they've already begun piloting and doing interesting work all across the United States and Canada. And I am finally looking forward to municipalities approaching what it means to make themselves whole and sovereign and resilient and truly adapted to the world that we are moving into, and to using really innovative forms of not only within their capital stack, but also leveraging tools like AI and blockchain to achieve this at scale.
Well, thank you, Seven, Andy, Lyric, Digital Innovation Hub, for hosting us today with elected officials to protect America and elected officials to protect the Earth. And of course, our partners at Wonder, who have put this wonderful study data together for us, where the possibilities are that we can work together to ensure that we can solve the climate crisis.